Imagine this. You're summoned to the grand royal feast. The fire roars in the great hall. Gold cutlery glints under chandeliers, and nobles sip from goblets encrusted with rubies. Everyone watches you. Not because you're a guest of honour, because you're the first to eat. And if that stew's been poisoned, well, congratulations! You just saved the kingdom by dying. Because you, my unfortunate friend, are the royal food taster. It sounds noble, even heroic. But make no mistake, this was one of the worst jobs in history. Because if you lived, no one would thank you. And if you died, well, let's just say they didn't exactly name a feast in your honour. In stories, the food taster is a quiet guardian of the king's life, a shadowy figure with a noble purpose, a loyal protector, trusted, honoured. It meant proximity to power, a place at the king's table, a foot inside the velvet-draped halls of influence. You stood just steps away from the most powerful man in the kingdom, and just inches from your own grave. Because you weren't there to dine. You were there to die. First. Your job wasn't to enjoy the roast duck or fine wine. Your job was to take the risk, chew the bite, swallow the poison, so the king didn't have to. No armour, no sword, no glory, just a spoon and a short life expectancy. Every feast was a minefield. Every dish was a gamble. Every bite could be your last. You weren't trained in medicine or poison detection. You weren't given an antidote. You weren't even briefed on what to look for. You were simply expected to sit down, smile, and take the first bite. And if you fell over convulsing, well, thank you for your service. The king won't be eating that dish. The idea of a food taster is ancient. Versions of it existed in empires across time: Persia, Egypt, Imperial China, the Roman Senate, and beyond. But during the late medieval to early Renaissance period in Europe, the job reached peak absurdity. Because by then, poison wasn't just a tool of assassination. It had become a fashionable strategy. The courts of France, Italy, and England were thick with plots. The poison was silent, clean, and didn't leave you with blood on your tunic. All you needed was a vial of powdered something and access to the royal plate. No confrontation, no guards alerted, just a few herbs in the stew, and boom, you're king now. So what did the monarchs do? They made it official. So food tasters weren't optional, they were protocol. Every royal household had one, sometimes several. Depending on the level of paranoia, the entire kitchen might be filled with testers, each assigned to a different dish. Because royalty didn't fear battle, they feared bread rolls. Especially if they came from a cousin with a suspicious claim to the throne. And here's the cruel twist. While tasters were meant to protect the king, they were often suspected themselves. After all, if you're the first to touch the food, you might also be the one who poisoned it. So, now you're eating dangerous meals to protect a man who doesn't trust you, and who might have you tortured if he suspects you didn't chew hard enough. It was a no-win situation. And once you became a taster, there was no retirement plan. Just a hope that your stomach outlived your service. Because in a world where trust was rare and death came in a goblet of wine, you were the last bite before the king. And most days, that bite tasted like fear. If the back of your throat itched, you ignored it. If your pupils dilated, you blinked harder. If your stomach clenched, your heart pounded, or your vision blurred, that was just nerves. Right? Right? No one cared about your fear. No one gave you grace. You were the canary in the banquet mine. And once symptoms started, it was already too late. Your skin went cold. Your knees gave out. You hit the floor, twitching or frothing or gasping. And somewhere in the background, you'd hear the clatter of silverware, chairs pushed back, a royal command, "Don't touch the wine!" That was it. No fanfare, no applause for your sacrifice. Just the knowledge that your death bought the king 15 more minutes. Maybe an hour. Maybe the night. Let's get one thing clear. Being a royal food taster wasn't a profession. It was a death sentence with a uniform. Contrary to what the movies tell you, these weren't some elite operatives trained in the deadly arts. They weren't master chefs, monks, or secret assassins. They were servants too afraid to say no. Slaves whose job description included die for dinner. Political exiles hoping to earn back favour. Or just desperate souls who needed food more than they feared death. They had no protective gear. No gloves, no masks, no iron stomachs. They weren't handed a scroll of ingredients or a guide on how not to die eating roast goose. Instead, they were shoved into a steaming kitchen filled with 10 other angry, unpaid cooks, told to wait in the shadows and summoned only when needed. Which meant every shift went something like this. You there, taster, plate 6, try the rabbit. You step forward. Everyone watches. You look at the chef, who might hate you for stealing his job last winter. You look at the server, who just lost his cousin in the palace brawl and wouldn't mind seeing you drop dead. You look at the food, steaming and innocent on a plate, that's passed through 12 hands, half of them with motives. And then you eat. And if something feels wrong, if the sauce is bitter, if your tongue tingles, if the meat tastes a little too metallic, you smile anyway, because spitting it out, that's treason. You're not allowed to hesitate. If you flinch, if you pause, if you cough, it could cause a panic. One woman fainted in a 15th century Italian court after the taster sneezed. The king threw his entire meal out the window. The taster was dragged away and replaced within the hour. Because your job wasn't just to taste. Your job was to look like you were enjoying it, to nod, smile, and signal safety, even as your own stomach churned. And if you died, well, they'd get another one. Because you weren't valuable, you were expendable reassurance, a human disclaimer. And the worst part, if the king got sick after you survived, you were still blamed. He must have been poisoned. You must have missed it. You must have built up an immunity. So now, you were the threat. Let's set the scene. It's winter. The fire crackles in the corner of a massive stone hall. Outside, snow falls like ash from a dying sky. Inside, tension. The king's brother had collapsed just days ago, face down in his pheasant stew. The cause? Unknown. But everyone has the same answer. Poison. And tonight's feast feels like the sequel. The table is dressed in gold. Roast duck glistens under dripping candles. Spiced wine waits to be sipped. The nobility shuffled in, half-starved, half-scared. Then the door creaks open. All heads turn. It's you, the food taster. No one claps. No one smiles. You are not a guest. You're a fuse with a heartbeat. You walk slowly to the high table. A silver plate is handed to you. Duck in plum sauce. A sprinkle of saffron. A dash of cinnamon. It smells like heaven. It could be death. You take the first bite. Chew. Swallow. The room goes silent. Dozens of nobles scan your face. If you flinch, a gasp. If you burp, a bishop bolts from the room. If you smile, they don't trust it. Everyone waits. 10 seconds. Nothing. 20 seconds. Still nothing. You nod. Step back. The feast begins. And somewhere down the table, someone whispers, "He's still breathing. For now." You would think tasting the king's food would make you powerful. But here's the truth. You weren't trusted. You were never safe. And you were always, always alone. Let's say you do your job perfectly. You taste everything. You live. The king eats. He lives too. Victory, right? Wrong. Because what happens when the king gets a stomachache the next morning? Not the chef, not the gardener, you. They'll say you didn't taste enough, that you let it slide, that maybe you were part of it. Tasters were arrested for doing their jobs correctly and still outliving the monarch. The logic was simple, brutal, and stupid. If you died, the king survived. If you lived and the king died, well, that's suspicious. So even if you won the game, you lost the prize. No amount of loyalty could change the fact that the closer you stood to the throne, the easier it was for the blade to reach your back. No one toasted the food taster. No one invited you to sit beside them. You didn't eat at the table. You tasted alone. Often in the back kitchen, or in a side hallway, or standing quietly near the door while the nobles dined. You weren't a guest. You were a shield, a human warning label. And the worst part? Even survival didn't earn you respect. Cooks avoided you. Ladies-in-waiting whispered behind their fans. Guards stared like they were just waiting for your face to turn blue. No one trusted you. And for good reason. Tasters had access to the food before anyone else. So if the king was poisoned, suspicion always came full circle. Even if you were innocent, you were dangerous. Because most people started asking questions. Why does he always survive? How did she know to avoid that dish? Is the taster immune or involved? The longer you lived, the more they feared you. Until finally they replaced you. Not because you failed, but because you didn't. To really understand why food tasters existed, you need to understand this. Everyone in power expected to be killed. Not just suspected, not feared, expected. In Renaissance Italy, some nobles changed tasters every week. In France, monarchs rotated their kitchens entirely after royal deaths. In England, poison paranoia hit peak madness under Henry VIII, who allegedly kept dozens of tasters and made them taste each other's food. It wasn't paranoia, it was policy. In some courts, 4 tasters were assigned per meal. 1 for meats, 1 for sweets, 1 for wine, 1 as a backup if the first 3 were bribed. The Borgia family? Famous for slipping poison into wine goblets mid-conversation. Catherine de' Medici? Rumoured to wear a ring that dispensed toxins. Even minor lords in Venice carried lockets of powdered death under their robes, just in case. One diplomat once wrote, "A banquet in Florence is less a feast than a funeral rehearsal." Poison wasn't rare. It was fashionable, quick, quiet, and often untraceable. That's why kings needed someone else to eat first. Not because they believed it would save them, but because it gave them 10 extra seconds to react. And for the food taster, that meant 10 seconds of being stared at like a condemned man who hadn't quite gotten the message yet. Sometimes it wasn't poison that killed you. It was a bad joke, a flinch, a misplaced comment. Imagine you grimace while chewing because the soup is too salty and 3 guards draw swords. You sneeze during dessert, you might get tackled. There were tasters who died not because they were poisoned, but because someone thought they had been. Panic in a court full of power equals executions first, questions later. Some tasters, like jesters, were buried without names. No grand funerals, no public mourning. Because their entire identity was tied to someone else's stomach. You didn't get remembered for surviving 999 meals, only for failing once. The record books are silent on most of them. We know more about the poisons they swallowed than the lives they lived, which is tragic considering they died so others could live. And no one ever thanked them. Oh yes, some food tasters developed tricks. Fake swallowing, chew, pretend, and secretly spit into a cloth. Small bites. Poisons more potent in large quantities. Shared plates. Sneak in neutral food and pretend it's royal cuisine. Paying off the chef to warn if anything suspicious happened. But all it took was one mistake. One cook with a grudge. One guest with a motive. One noble with a powdered ring. And your tricks didn't matter. Because poison doesn't care about cleverness, it just works. Being a food taster wasn't just physically risky, it was emotionally crushing. You lived every day expecting death, You flinched every time your stomach rumbled. You couldn't trust anyone. Not the cooks, not the royals, not even your own body. Hypervigilance became a way of life. Some tasters developed full-blown trauma responses, nausea before meals, phantom pains, paranoia, and dreams of choking. But you still had to show up, because "I'm feeling anxious" wasn't a good enough reason to skip dinner. Not when your king is hungry. You'd think monarchs would realise this was a flawed system, but they didn't, because power creates paranoia, and paranoia breeds rituals. Food tasting became part of court theatre. The king arrives, the food is unveiled, the taster eats, everyone watches. Even if the method didn't guarantee safety, it gave the illusion of control. It wasn't about preventing death, it was about appearing invincible. And what better way to prove you're untouchable than having someone else risk their life for every meal? Here's the wild part. Food tasters didn't die in the Middle Ages. Adolf Hitler had at least 15 women taste his food before every meal. Saddam Hussein used random tasters and often ate alone. Reports suggest some US presidents have employed food security specialists to this day, while others stuck to meals from the Golden Arches. Because despite all our advancements, we still don't trust each other. And the best way to be safe? Let someone else swallow the risk. So, why did it suck to be a royal food taster? Because you were never a person. You were a filter for death. Too expendable to matter, too close to power to be safe, too valuable to ignore, too risky to be trusted. Every day you lived was borrowed. Every meal was a potential execution. Every breath between bites felt like holding the edge of a blade in your mouth. And the cruelest part? When you finally dropped dead from poison, you didn't even get dessert.